Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to get started in just a minute here. I'm just going to go over some quick housekeeping items while people are coming in from the waiting room. So just to tell you a little more about the Housing Alliance, we are a statewide coalition working to increase access to safe, decent, and affordable housing for all Pennsylvanians. Our webinars are free for members. So if you do want to become a member, please contact, info@housingalliancepa.org, as you can see on the slide, or visit housingalliancepa.org/become a member. Today's webinar is going to run for an hour, which includes time for Q&A as well. Please utilize the Q&A function. If you have any questions, you will find that on the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, technical or otherwise, for the Housing Alliance staff, please use the chat function, which can also be found at the bottom of your screen. We will send out a copy of the recording as well as slides and any other materials that we are presenting here within a week of this webinar. Lastly, we also wanted to use this time to let you know that registration is open for our 20th annual Homes Within Reach conference, which will be from December 4th to December 6th at Hershey Lodge in Hershey, PA. You can also find more information on this at our website, housingalliancepa.org. I will now pass it over to Gail to take us through today's webinar.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Gail Schwartz, Director of Policy and Programs and Outreach here at the Housing Alliance. And we're very excited for you to be joining with us today and for really, once again, showing up for the call to do some advocacy. So we're here to talk about energy efficiency today. Energy efficiency can lower energy bills for individuals and households and help stabilize electricity prices. It can improve physical and mental health, including reducing symptoms of respiratory and cardiovascular conditions, preventing mental health disorders like anxiety and depression, and it can improve property values and home prices. And energy efficiency goes beyond individual benefits, right? It can also reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants, lowers overall electricity demand, it can create jobs. And so today we're going to be talking specifically about the HER and HERE programs, which offer single-family and multifamily homeowner rebates for energy efficiency improvements. These are new programs that are a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection is managing these programs and needs to hear from those of us that are going to take advantage of these rebates on how they should work. DEP is conducting information sessions to discuss the development of these programs and get input and questions to help in the planning and implementation of these programs. So today we're going to be hearing from Pat Coleman with New Ecology, Liz Marks with the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, and the Housing Alliance's own Jen Thomas. Together, we're going to review the home energy rebate programs and then discuss what to expect and how to prepare for these meetings with DEP. So now that you have a sense of who we are, I am hoping that all of you can tell us who you are. So we're going to put up a poll real quick, just so we can get a sense of who's in the room with us. So we want to know, do we have any housers in the room? People who have experience with home repair, weatherization, CAP agencies, human service nonprofits, community-based organizations, legal services that can be working with tenants and homeowners experiencing utility burdens, property managers, tenants, pretty much anybody across the spectrum. So we'll just give it a few more seconds. And Chris, are we ready to show the results?
Yep, they're up right now. Can you see them?
I can see them, yes. So we got a lot of housing providers in the room. We got a lot of people working with home repair programs, community action agencies, both landlords and homeowners, a lot of community residents and environmental advocates. So that is great. We are excited to have you join us today. Now, just as a matter of full transparency, we really were hoping to have more details about the specifics of these programs, but those details have yet to be shared. That being said, the lack of details provided by DEP to date is all the more reason for us to show up and hold DEP accountable for creating equitable programs that are going to work for the people and communities who need them the most. And so on that note, I'm going to pass it over to you, Pat.
Thanks, Gail. Let me just get myself oriented here and share some slides. I'll get there. Hang on. Okay. Can I get a confirmation those
Yes.
slides are up?
Yeah, we
Yep.
can see it. Yeah, nice and
Great,
clear.
thank you. Okay, thanks again, Gail. And folks, again, my name is Pat Coleman, and I work for New Ecology. We're a nonprofit organization that provides a lot of green building and energy efficiency and building science services, mostly in the affordable housing space. So I'm going to spend the next couple minutes trying to summarize some of the key elements and the basic programmatic framework for these two rebate programs, and then hand it off to my colleague Liz Marks from Pulp to talk a little bit more about specific content areas that people may consider in submission of your comments and questions to DEP. So we have two programs that are poised to be launched by the Department of Environmental Protection. They are the Home Efficiency Rebate Program and the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program, or HER and HERE. Both of these programs were authorized and are funded by the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which passed a couple years ago. This is a massive new federal program. It's about $9 billion across the country. There were formulas to determine how much money each state gets. And so Pennsylvania is getting about, it's poised to get $260 million for about 10 years of programming through these rebate initiatives. Most of the content that I'm going to go over here today comes from the U.S. Department of Energy's program requirements and application instructions. So if there's content that I get into, you want to learn more, you want to, really dive in, that's the document kind of highlighted on the right hand of the screen here that you want to get into. There's a hyperlink if you want to take a screenshot, get into it. It's a pretty accessible document to describe how these programs can operate. I want to highlight a couple of things up front, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this two-step process to program launch. DEP right now is working to apply, so they need to submit an application to the Department of Energy for these programs. After that, they need to create what's called an implementation blueprint, which I'm going to get into later, but it has a lot more detail and substance with respect to community engagement, workforce impact, consumer protections, a lot of the things that I suspect are of interest to those of you attending this session. And so just keep in mind, there's this little two-step process here before program launch. I want to highlight that at a minimum, Pennsylvania needs to be allocating at least 40% of the program funding in service of low-income households. They can go higher. And I want to highlight that there are resources throughout these programs to facilitate engagement and support of installation of energy efficiency and clean energy upgrades in disadvantaged and low-income communities. So first up, the HER program, the Home Efficiency Rebate Program. This is a program, it's getting about, each of these programs get about half of the funding, so about $130 million in program resources. DEP will be selecting an administrator for the program. And what DEP has shared is their intent here is to focus on existing buildings. I mean, they have to actually, by the federal statute, focus on existing buildings. And they're going to focus this program in service of the affordable multifamily program or sector. So this is an area where they should get credit. You know, they're expressing interest in going, you know, really programming those funds to go above just that 40% minimum threshold. The rebates, as you can see on the table here, are fairly substantial. You know, we're looking at rebates of $4,000 to $8,000 per unit, depending upon the depth of energy efficiency savings achieved. So pretty significant resource opportunity. There's a question on how one can estimate those energy savings or determine those energy savings. You can use a modeled or an estimation method of, you know, what kind of energy savings am I going to get through a package of measures? Or you can measure the savings after implementation. And Pennsylvania has expressed interest in using the model-based methodology. So next up is the HER program. So this is the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program. As the name suggests, this is a program to facilitate a transition to all electric buildings and transition off of the combustion of fossil fuels inside homes. Again, it's about $130 million. DEP will be selecting an administrator for this program. This can serve new construction as well as existing buildings. It can serve owner-occupied homes as well as rental properties. Again, these are some significant rebates, up to $14,000 per housing unit. If you're a low-income household, that rebate can go to cover up to 100% of the costs of an upgrade. For moderate income households, it's up to 50% of the costs of the upgrades. I want to highlight that this is an area, you know, where there are significant incentives available to a variety of entity types that can facilitate these projects, and DEP can limit the use of that type of incentive in service of projects in low-income households. Okay, moving beyond just kind of, you know, the sectors to be served and the level of resources that are available. There's a lot of words on this slide, but I want to just take a moment to talk about some of the related wraparound kind of benefits and opportunities that can come through these rebate programs. So in terms of process, right, DEP needs to be facilitating public input sessions to get comment from all of us on how these programs within the structure of the federal agency's framework really can be deployed and implemented in the state of Pennsylvania. They need to be facilitated, they need to get that input, and they need to demonstrate how it has impacted their program design. Even after the programs are implemented, they need to maintain that community input coming in and address it. These are, you know, intended to be 10-year programs, so we've got a long runway here. They need to be articulating what their community engagement strategies are and how they're going to reach critical stakeholders. And I want to highlight that in the DOE federal kind of program guidelines, they're strongly encouraged to fund community partners to engage in underserved communities. With respect to workforce, DEP needs to develop a plan that describes their strategies to work with contractors that invest in workforce training and that retain skilled jobs. They need to be they're encouraged to demonstrate commitment to working with MWBEs, as well as organizations that are going to provide supportive services for workers like childcare and transportation. In accordance with the federal government's Justice 40 initiative and really trying to channel these resources to underserved communities, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of responsibilities that they have around facilitating outreach and impact in those communities, and then tracking it over time to demonstrate you know, what is getting done. I want to highlight a couple things around income verification and critical issues with respect to tenants. They have to allow forms of categorical eligibility to access these funds. So that could be a household that is on Medicaid or participating in a LIHEAP program. It could be a property that is owned by a public housing authority is automatically deemed eligible to be able to get into these rebate programs. There are opportunities to, in the case of, say, an emergency failure of equipment, for self-attestation of income, and how that works and the safeguards that are built around that, I think, are critically important. So that's an area ripe for comment for folks. In terms of tenant protections, there may be varying levels of rebates that are available here. As I talked about previously, that income threshold is based upon the income of the occupant, not the landlord. Though in order to implement the upgrades, one needs to get approval by the landlord. There are protections that are built in place for at least 2 years, such as the owner needs to continue renting the home to a low-income household. There can be no eviction or rent increase based on the improvement, with an exception for covering higher property taxes or specified operating expenses and maintenance costs. If a property is sold, these conditions, these protections are to carry through that transfer of ownership. Last slide, I just want to lay out some of the key dates and activities that we should expect in the next couple of months. So again, there's this two-step process. There's the application, and then there's the blueprint. So applications are accepted by the federal government on a rolling basis. They are due by the end of January. We understand that DEP has submitted an application for here, but not yet for her. So they are working very hard right now to wrap up these applications and materials. For the blueprints, this is where they really need to get into a lot more of the details around the community benefits plan, the education and outreach strategy, consumer protections. DEP has shared that it's their intent to roll these programs out in early 2025. So when you start to stack up these dates, the blueprint is due after DOE has accepted an application and made an award, but at least 60 days before program launch, right? DOE must approve that blueprint before the program is launched. So if applications need to go in by the end of January, they want to roll out programs in early 2025, we're going to see a lot of activity in the next couple months. And this is really our moment to be able to provide comment and guidance and try to make the most out of this massive investment in Pennsylvania. So with that, I am going to pass it off to my colleague, Liz Marks. Liz, you're up.
Thanks, Pat. Hi, everyone. Give me 1 second while I work to share my screen. And while I'm doing that, if folks could type in the chat, I'd love to know why you want to engage in this. What brought you to this session? What are the reasons why you are here at the table to learn about these programs and to hopefully engage in the public engagement sessions next week? So if anybody is brave enough to share that in the chat, and you should be seeing just the presentation of my slides. And if I can get a verification from anyone that you're not seeing other of my many open tabs on my screen, that would be great.
All good, Liz.
All right. Awesome. Well, and let's see. Okay, sustainability improvements in public housing authorities is the one brave soul, and I think that is so critical as far as why to engage. But we know, as comments come in, I'll tell you a little bit about why the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project is engaged, and we've been very engaged in these programs. And that's for a number of reasons. I think many of us share, right? Reducing energy costs being at the top of that list. We've got someone on the call who needs a heat pump to replace a gas furnace and some window air units. So an individual need, working with community land trusts to encourage owners to take advantage of this, right? getting the community ready so that we can preserve affordable housing, we can invest in low-income and environmental justice communities. Oh, good. Seeing what the LIHTC complexes might qualify for. Exactly, right? So we can preserve more of those affordable housing projects across the state. We can strengthen community resiliency, right? Devastating hurricanes hitting the South at the moment. We are not immune. We have all been recently. Many of our communities were through DEP, and that impacted affordable housing. There was impacts from some of the severe weather down in the Southeast. Um, uh, Engaging in some of these IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act programs, are really intended to strengthen our communities, prevent out-of-pocket expenses for those that can't afford the transition, expanding our local and diverse workforce, supporting community-based organizations and small contractors, and ensuring that low-income communities aren't left behind in the energy transition. This is huge for the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, and I know many of you. It's super important because if we end up with low-income households left on the gas grid or left as the last of the oil consumers, those prices will skyrocket. We are already seeing increased costs borne by folks who are remaining on those fossil fuel systems as wealthier homes transition. So there's some great input here, making sure that we have simple applications. Yes. And getting some information to be able to help clients, low-income clients, reduce their energy costs. So all reasons why we're engaged here and why it's just really important to bring this to DEP's attention. Our experience as from the various fields that we're in, and making sure that as they roll out these programs, the design of the programs are informed by those of us on the ground administering income qualified programming, getting services out to the communities that have been historically underserved. I will say, I work really closely with many of the folks administering these programs, and they share most of these goals, if not all of these goals. But there's a difference, right? When you are prioritizing, and approach may differ. So it's just really critical to hear what frontline folks that are on the ground administering programs already believe that is needed for these programs to fit within existing delivery methods. Because as much money as this is coming to the state, we also have to be able to outlast the funding, right? And to be able to transition and integrate this with existing programs. So I'm going to talk briefly before we get to kind of what the, we'll up next, you'll hear from folks at the Housing Alliance again about how these engagement sessions or informational sessions that DEP is hosting are going to be formatted. We have some advanced information about that we'll share with you. Really, what I'm going to do is talk through some of the areas that are ripe for advocacy that we know that your communities care about so that we can get you thinking about how it is that you might want to inform DEP to better make these programs match. So, one is establishing additional opportunities for public engagement. As Pat mentioned, there is some ongoing guidance from the Department of Energy requiring that there be established channels for ongoing feedback. So what does that look like? What would you be able to do? How do you want to engage? Those are important questions to think about as you're getting ready to go to these sessions next week or the week after, and to provide input via surveys or other opportunities. Maybe it's hosting stakeholder meetings, right? Where you get a group of folks that have similar experiences to you, focus group style. Another area ripe for advocacy would be developing robust education outreach. And I saw in the chat that some folks are here at the table because they want to be able to inform their communities and help their clients access these programs when they come online. Well, then, perhaps your interest is in advocating around ensuring that DEP is contracting with local community-based organizations, trusted folks to navigate, right? Many of us went through the pandemic program rollouts, and having resource navigators was hugely important. So if that's important to you, it's important that DEP hear that. Developing tenant-focused education about efficiency programs, right? It's one thing to install a whole bunch of fancy advanced energy equipment in a multifamily building, but then how do tenants use it? How do they engage? And what kind of educational programs are going to come through here and her? Is there training for those of you on the call that actually, are building managers, right? How are you going to use that equipment? Do you know what that does? Installation of these things is going to do to replacements schedules. How often, you're going to need to maintenance them to make sure that they're in good working condition. All of that might be included in thinking about what kind of education and outreach needs to be in these programs. Think about, of course, the Pennsylvania Utility Lot Project. We are always first and foremost focused on, can people afford energy, right? Because if they can't afford it to begin with, it doesn't matter how clean it is, they're going to be priced out of the market. So making sure that as some of these programs electrify homes, that we are not actually raising energy bills and we are driving those energy costs down. So considering, comments or asking questions of DEP to focus electrification on deliverable fuel customers, which already have very high electricity rates, right? Or I'm sorry, energy rates. Oil and propane are some of the most expensive fuels to heat your home. So is there, can we focus on some of those populations? Or is DEP going to include an energy burden analysis in their assessments or audits before we transition a household to electric equipment? All really important questions, right? Also, are we factoring in, when we're talking with potential participants in these programs, a discussion with them about what ongoing maintenance looks like and how long the useful life of those programs are, all of which could contribute to increasing costs if we're not careful, right? Beneficial electrification can absolutely reduce overall home energy burdens, but it has to be done in a targeted way. So, thinking about, from your perspective, what it is that DEP should be doing to make sure that the people you serve are going to be able to reduce those energy costs through these programs. Of course, pushing on allocation of funding to serve low-income families. Right now, it's our understanding DEP is planning to propose 40.3% of the HERE program would go to serve low and moderate income households, and that the HER program would be dedicated to serving affordable multifamily, which would mostly reach low-income households. But how do we make sure that the very lowest income households are going to be able to afford these programs? Think about, should there be interim benchmarks, right? Is DEP going to think about how to make sure we're able to serve households not just below 80% of the area median income, but also below 30% of the area median income? Those of you on this call that work with very low income populations know that it's very challenging to be able to serve those households unless you're very intentional with outreach and education. Couple other areas for advocacy, right? Promoting equitable distribution of funds. I don't know if folks want to give me a signal in the chat. Are you in a rural area? Are you in a suburban area? Thinking about making sure that region by region in Pennsylvania are going to receive equitable access to these services. Coordination. I will say I should have put this number one. I didn't, but it is at the very top of our list for everything. It is complicated. Those of you housers out there, how many of you get frustrated with all of the efficiency programs, all of the weatherization programs, and helping your clients navigate what's the right one? With this rollout of funds, we have a chance to make a one-stop shop where folks enter through a single application and get routed to different programs. It's important that the DEP, if that's something you prioritize, if that's something that you see in your community, is that they hear about the need for that. Of course, prioritizing contractors that deliver WAP or whole home repairs or utility run efficiency programs. When you have a single contractor, that really does help. And of course, in order to do that kind of work, you would need to provide some training and technical assistance for those smaller local contractors and nonprofit agencies so that they can help administer these programs through that kind of one stop. Um, Eliminating out-of-pocket costs for participation, another huge area for advocacy, and this goes back right to the need for coordination, because if you coordinate programs, if you leverage those others and you stack them on top of each other to make sure that you can fill the gaps, that minimizes any kind of unintended costs that may not be anticipated, right? So when you're installing a heat pump, do you run into, other costs? Sure, right? Anybody that's out there installing or has done any work on their home knows that not all projects go according to plan and most don't. So how do we anticipate and fill the gaps with other funding sources? If it's something, you're worried about, okay, I can get these rebates, but what am I going to do about taking advantage of the tax credits? Maybe you want to be suggesting that there be tax clinics to ensure that participants can access those available tax credits in addition to the rebates. Again, encouraging DEP to work with private foundations to fill the gaps. All of these are potential areas that you may want to consider, raising if that's important to you or you see that as an area for your community. Just a couple more, because we want to give you a broad swath. We've been thinking a lot about these programs for a long time, and these are a lot of the areas that we have identified for advocacy. I'm sure you have as well. But supporting the growth of local and diverse workforce. Pat reviewed with you some of the requirements for community education, and that's a really important one, right? How do you make sure that the work is going to local contractors, women, minority owned, veteran owned businesses that are out there doing this work in their communities? Matching providers to workforce training and apprenticeship programs that are going to be able to bring more folks from the community in to deliver the services, right? Helping lift up the same populations that we are serving through these programs. Somebody mentioned earlier that they're here because of streamlined application, right? And the need for that. This is a great opportunity to push DEP towards the use of a single application that could qualify across multiple programs, expanding categorical eligibility to include state level programs. I'll share with you, I know DEP is planning to allow most of the federal public benefits programs, LIHEAP, Medicaid, SNAP, all of those as categorical eligibility. But are there other state-run programs that they should consider including that would be easy for folks to verify that they're participating and therefore they don't need to provide kind of burdensome documentation? But many of you run housing programs. What other programs are there, or what kinds of documentation should they require to minimize and make it easy for folks to apply? Um, Establishing a pre-approval process, right? And this goes to some of the consumer protections, but what happens if you don't verify correctly? Getting a pipeline for those projects can be important. Of course, we really care about consumer rights as well, utility law projects. So a couple issues there. Ensuring disclosures, right? Plain language disclosures. And of course, I think I breezed by a point earlier about language access, but that's important when you're putting, um, uh, you know, uh, dis, uh, disclosures together. What languages are spoken in your communities and what should DEP consider in terms of language access? Is there a dispute resolution and appeals process in case there's any issues with the installations? Is there a list of approved contractors that folks can verify, right? There's a lot of scams out there and they can sometimes hit lower income consumers, seniors, others with disabilities. a little bit harder, right? Harder to ferret out whether or not this is the free government program or if this is someone knocking on your door to sell you a product that you don't really want. It's really important, to be able to have that as part of a consumer protection plan. Is it establishing post inspections to make sure that the work is done, to the consumer's satisfaction, right? We're not just trying to do work in low-income homes, we're trying to improve low-income homes. Establishing a fund to support repairs or supporting what is, a clean and tune program run by, funded by LIHEAP and the Weatherization Assistance Program. Is it putting more money into that to make sure the communities we serve have the ability to fix their furnaces if they break down once they put in, advanced equipment. And then last note I'll have here is, think about data tracking, reporting, transparency. What would you like to see to be able to know where these benefits are going and how whether and how the state is ensuring that it's reaching all communities. I saw that there are both, we've got some rural folks, we've got some urban folks on the call, but Pennsylvania is a broad state. I sit in Harrisburg, so I know that, and I grew up in north central Pennsylvania, but I also lived in Philadelphia, and so I know all corners of the state, and they're very different. But how are we making sure that we're reaching all of those? And really, as folks, leaders in your community, in the housing community, in the contractor community, in the environmental justice community, all of you are really the folks that DEP needs to hear from about how to serve your communities best. Um, uh, so I'm thrilled. I'm happy to answer any questions. That is all I have in terms of, some talking points. I hope you'll consider them, consider kind of raising them to DEP if they're things that speak to your experience, right? Because it's most important as you're sharing feedback with DEP that you're speaking from your experience and from what you think your community is going to need in order to make sure these programs serve your clients. So with that, I'm going to turn it over or back to the Housing Alliance. I think it's Jen is up next to talk about what the engagement looks like. So
Thank you so much, Liz. I'm going to just share my screen. And like everyone else, can I get a confirmation that you're seeing my slides?
yep, we're
I can
seeing
see it slides.
Great, great. Okay, well, first of all, thanks everyone for being here. This is really important, and we really appreciate you answering the call to turn out and engage with this process. So you heard a lot about the why and the what, and now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the where and the when and the how to engage in this process as it currently stands. So first thing you'll see here on the screen is these are the currently scheduled DEP input sessions. There are 3 in person and 1 virtual. We're going to launch a poll. I'm just curious to see, which ones you're planning on attending, which ones you've already registered for. If you're planning on attending, we'll leave that up for a couple of seconds. Great. Great. Okay. So a lot of folks are going to attend the virtual one. That makes sense. A couple people are going to attend in person. That's great. For folks attending the in-person sessions, we really encourage you to bring folks with you and just show up in a group and show DEP that there's a lot of people who care about this issue. Great. Okay, we can end the poll. Thanks, everyone. So if you are planning on attending and you haven't yet registered, we're going to throw the registration link in the chat. So please register for the one that's closest to you. It is very possible the DEP is going to schedule another session in another area, and that is something we can keep you updated on as that information comes down the line. Okay, so the structure of these public input sessions, we just got information on this of the way they're going to look. It's going to start off with a 20-minute overview of HERE and HER programs with a 45-minute Q&A session for participants. And this Q&A session is primarily going to be digital. So attendees are going to be able to submit their questions through their iPhones or their Androids. iPads will be passed around to submit your questions, and there will be note cards available to write your questions down. And then there's going to be about 10 minutes left at the end for follow-up and other questions and conversation. So verbal testimony will not be included in these sessions, but there is going to be a survey sent out afterwards, and there's going to be an opportunity to email DEP with further feedback and comments about the programs. So what can you do to prepare? So definitely review the key points and questions that were discussed today. We will be sharing out the materials that were presented so you can start looking over those and reviewing them to prepare your questions. Liz shared a lot of really important areas for advocacy. So reviewing those and thinking through which ones are the most important to you, what is going to impact the work you do and the people you serve, and then really crafting your feedback and questions for the input session with that information. Definitely write out your questions beforehand. It's always great to go in prepared to things like this. And then prepare questions that relate to your experiences and your concerns. You don't have to become an expert on the policy, but you're an expert on the community and the people you serve. So really think about your experiences with programs like this and what you need for it to be successful. I am curious if folks wouldn't mind answering in the chat, what are you most excited about regarding these programs? I'm going to give folks a minute to answer. Some folks already did share a little bit, but if anyone else has anything they're really looking forward to, now would be a great time to share it. And then while you're thinking about what you're looking forward to when it comes to these programs, also think about what you're most concerned about regarding these programs. And if you'd like to share that in the chat as well at this time, that would be great. Making progress on commitments. Yep. Thanks, hand. Anybody else have anything they want to share, what they're excited about or what they're concerned about? Okay, we'll keep them coming. We're excited to expand energy, our efficiency and weatherization services to more disadvantaged communities. Thanks, Stephen. That's great. So what you can do is you can take the things that you're excited about and you could take the things you're concerned about and look over those advocacy areas that Liz shared and turn these into questions to ask during the input session so that all of these concerns and these things you're excited about can be taken into consideration for the program design. So then when you're thinking about your follow-up, like I said, there's not going to really be an opportunity for verbal testimony at the input sessions, but you are able to follow up with DEP either through a survey or through an email. Make sure you're sticking to your key points, talking about the areas you care about the most. Share questions that you had that maybe weren't answered or you feel the need to restate. So send additional questions, restate previous questions. And then again, I can't stress this enough, really ground your comments in your concerns and your excitement for the program, because that really is what reinforces the thoughtful feedback that you're giving. So next steps, definitely register for one of the input sessions. Get a group together. It's important to show force and bring people with you to these sessions to show DEP that you're engaged and you care about this and that it's important that it's rolled out correctly. Write your questions out in advance, grounding them in your concerns and experiences. This really helps make your follow-up more impactful and relevant. And then complete the feedback survey by October 31st is what I believe the deadline will be. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. We can send reminders out about these things. And then this is the email where you can send additional comments and questions to DEP after the input sessions. And then stay engaged throughout this process. We are happy to continue to host things like this, send reminders, send you updates as they come down the line. We're going to launch another poll. Let us know if you want to stay engaged throughout this process, because it's really important that you're here with us throughout everything. Okay, great. Well, thanks, everybody. Okay, it looks like pretty much everyone who answered wants to stay involved in the process. Thank you so much. And with that, I am going to invite my fellow panelists to come back on, and we're going to move into Q&A. We have about 15 minutes for questions. Let's see here, I'm going to open the Q&A. Not seeing any questions. If anybody has any questions at this time about anything we shared, please go ahead and pop it in the Q&A. Wow, we must have done a really good job, everybody. No questions. They're saving them for DEP, which is great.
Yeah, that's good. Yes. Save it for ask all your questions to DEP. And as somebody said in a meeting the other day, I cannot take credit, but I laughed. We're in Jeopardy rules. So pose your notes as a question and you should be able to be heard.
Yeah. Okay, we have a couple questions now. One from Stephen. Regarding the one-stop shop registration, is there anything happening on that front yet?
Well, I'll say there is a lot happening in different spaces. The Utility Commission is working on a common application form, but it hasn't yet been implemented, and that is for utility-run programs. DCED runs the weatherization, DCED being the Department of Community and Economic Development, runs the weatherization assistance program and has been talking with DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, about creating some kind of overlay website that might be able to launch multiple programs and give people a single door to enter. But there's an awful lot of logistics that need to be worked out with that. So in terms of what's happening on that front, I think I would say that there's a lot of discussion, but no quite clear consensus yet about how to pull the programs together that are run across many different agencies.
Thanks, Liz. Pat, this question's for you. Can you clarify again about the percentage of HER expected to go to single family, if any?
So the HER program, we understand from DEP, is going to be focused on the affordable multifamily sector. So that would typically be, say properties that have a project-based Section 8 contract or a low-income housing tax credit allocation. So not owner-occupied properties. The HERE program is open to both owner-occupied and rentals.
Thank you, Pat. Another question, when do you think this program will actually roll out?
I believe we understand that DEP intends to roll it out in early 2025. The focus right now is they need to get these applications done, and then they'll need to be able to, get the blueprint materials prepared. So I think, Liz may have a little bit more detail than I do, but I think that's as much as we could say.
I think that's right. And I would just add that it's very highly likely that we will see the HERE program, the home electrification appliance rebate program that is focused on single families, roll out first. And I think that'll probably happen at least by the end of the first quarter of 2025. They're working really hard. They want to get these rebates on the street. I also will note every time I use the word rebate, I have to caveat that they are thinking about this as no upfront payment, that they would use contractor aggregators to kind of make sure that there isn't out of pocket for those rebates. But we should see hopefully some of these rebates hit the streets first quarter of 2025. But I'll caveat that with this is just based on what we know about their timeline as it stands, and there are an awful lot of hurdles to clear before these rebates get to market.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Pat. I just saw a comment come through in the chat saying, I'm concerned about single-family homeowners not knowing that the program exists. And I just want to say that would be a great question to ask at one of these sessions. How are you going to be letting single-family homeowners know these programs exist? So that's a really, really good example of turning your concerns into questions that you can pose to DEP during these input sessions. Thank you for sharing. Another question is, will these funds cover workforce training?
I think my best and honest answer is I can't give you an exact statement on what they can do with respect to training. With the Inflation Reduction Act at large and the building infrastructure law, there is an incredible amount of investment going on right now in clean energy workforce training, right? Like in Pittsburgh, they're, creating a new training center to support the clean energy transition. So there's a lot going on in that space. Specifically with regard to these programs, what I understand is there is encouragement to work with contractors who are investing in training. But whether or not you can use the programmatic funds of these rebate programs for training, I'm not sure right now.
Yeah, I'll add that I think that's right. There's separate funding that is being coordinated with these trainings to get free training, apprenticeship programs to weatherization energy efficiency contractors with a focus on small contractors and minority women-owned businesses. There are a number of other groups that have other federal funds. So there's regional program being created by the Association for Blacks in Energy that is really excited down in the southeast corner. Pat mentioned the new training center that the Clean Energy Center is expanding to across the state. I think there's another one going in southeast Pennsylvania as well. So they are certainly focused on energy efficiency contractor and weatherization provider training that's going to partner with these programs as they roll out.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Pat. Looks like we have one more question right now. Any opportunities for nonprofits who own single-family properties and complete rehab on the homes before selling to an income-qualified buyer?
I mean, I would say there's tremendous opportunity, right? So there, if we're talking about that housing typology, we're in the here universe because we understand from DEP, they're going to focus on affordable multifamily. So yes, I think there ought to be opportunity. So many of the kind of wraparound services that are within grasp and kind of encouraged by DEP around funding and supporting community engagement and working with local actors, those are elements that are encouraged, opportunities that are in front of us with respect to these rebate programs, and speaks, I think, to the potential to work with local community-based organizations that are doing that kind of work to incorporate, say, pre-electrification measures or, installation of high-efficiency heat pumps and other equipment. How it's going to look, still TBD.
Right. And I would say going to a public engagement session, and if you can make it to an in-person one, the ability at the end of that agenda to have one-on-one conversations, I would say pose this as a question to DEP. They may not have thought about that particular single family, you're doing a rehab to specifically sell to income qualified folks. There's other kinds of you're the ones that are going to be able to think of these other machinations of housing that is not common. The thing that always comes to my mind is tangled title and how those folks are going to be able to access these programs. DEP may not be thinking about that, right? They're going as fast as they can to create these applications. So bringing it to their attention and particularly that engagement piece at the end where you can have a one-on-one conversation with DEP at their in-person sessions, it would be great to be able to bring that to their attention directly. Just making sure they're thinking about the whole universe of these different opportunities.
Absolutely. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Pat. It looks like those were all of the questions. If anybody has any more, please feel free to throw it in the chat real quick. Otherwise, please register for one of the input sessions. Take what you've learned here and apply it to the questions you're going to be asking at these sessions. We're also going to be hosting another one of these prep sessions this evening at 6 p.m. It's going to be the same content, but if you know anybody who may benefit from learning and hearing about the process, who's interested in attending the input sessions, please share the registration link with them. The more the merrier. We'd love to have you all here. We appreciate you answering the call and engaging in this process. And if anybody has any further questions after this webinar, please reach out to us. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day. And please register for one of the sessions, and we'll send these materials out to you very quickly so you have them to prepare for the input sessions. Okay. Take care, everybody.